Chapter 2, The Shepherds. This is one of my favorite chapters to talk about because it showcases several of my favorite strategies and techniques for the first time, and on top of that, it's a chapter that many people struggle with initially, including myself. Many Lunatic Plus runs end right here, and even people trying to play Lunatic for the first time often hit this chapter like a brick wall. It's made to feel impossible, but as you refine your strategy, your ability to clear this map will become more consistent, and you can produce measurable results that make you feel rewarded for good play and make you feel like you've become a better player. That's what this entire video series is about, so let's get right into it with our discussion on Frontloaded Risk. We talked about this in Chapter 0 a little bit, but in Chapter 0 you had no choice. The Myrmidon can dodge your attack, and there's nothing you can do about it. No prep screen, no macro strategy, no builds, nothing. You have to use the tools the game gives you on turn 1 of the game. Here we have lots of options, and I want to make an argument for why taking risky, high variance actions is actually oftentimes going to yield the most consistently good results over time. We're going to see this on full display later with fantastic Lunatic Plus units like Long Ku, but for today, let's stick with the basics. If you try to play every turn as safely as possible, what will happen over time is that every time you get unlucky, every time you make a mistake, your odds of success will go down more and more and more. You might have a 100% safe opener on turn 1 that you've come up with, but your turn 2 looks very messy, with lots of enemies still alive, and on turn 3 or 4, maybe you get backed into a corner, and you're forced to make a risky 70% attack, and when it misses, you're forced to reset. You just wasted 5, 10, 15 minutes of your time on every failed attempt. This isn't a problem if you can guarantee 100% consistency, but that's very difficult to do on Lunatic Plus, especially if you're trying to train up and use all of your units. Furthermore, I don't personally believe most casual players approach the game this way. I think most people are not spending hours ahead of time coming up with a foolproof plan that always works, and then uploading the perfect clear to their YouTube channel. That's like 100 people in the world who do that, and there's like tens of thousands of players who don't do that. For the average player, I think it's a lot more valuable to teach them techniques, strategies, and tools that can be adapted for general play, both to increase your odds of success and minimize the amount of time spent on failed attempts, while steering through the game on a turn-by-turn basis. And I'm going to say it again, so remember this term, front-loaded risk. Instead of trying to make a 100% consistent turn 1 opener, I choose to take a turn 1 opener that only works about 40% of the time, which might seem insane on the surface, but think about it. If it fails, I'm only wasting 30 seconds to quickly reset the game and try again. And more importantly, if it succeeds, it can save me 3 to 5 minutes or longer on an attempt that would have failed later anyway, and overall, if the map takes me a few tries to clear, it could save me up to an hour of total time wasted resetting on failed attempts. Or even more, because the majority of my failed attempts will die on turn 1 instead of trying to play passively and failing on turn 3 or turn 4. In fact, I tend to gain so much momentum with my openers that my strategies are overall way more consistent on turns 2, 3, and beyond, which ultimately means that I'm front-loading all of my risk to the very first turn, where the time lost is the least punishing, while making the rest of the chapter more consistent. This is the argument for utilizing front-loaded risk. If you ask any top-level speedrunner of pretty much any game if they would add a trick to the first 30 seconds of their run that can save from 5 minutes to 1 hour of total time, I guarantee you they would attempt it every single run, even if it only had a 40% chance of success, or even significantly worse. While I've been talking about this, I've been showing a more passive opener play out in the background, and as you can see, eventually what's happened, I didn't gain enough momentum on the first turn, and eventually the enemies pushed my units back into this corner. I no longer have any safe places for my support units to stand, and even Frederick is getting overwhelmed by these enemies. I have to take a risk now that one of my units will hopefully dodge an attack, otherwise it's an instant game over. And even if that unit survives by some miracle, they'll still be in danger next turn from the additional enemies. I end up being forced and taking increasingly risky plays several turns into the map by trying to avoid a risky turn 1 move. I end up taking risky moves later on anyway, but the later risk is way more punishing. Now let's start again. Have Crom pair up with Frederick immediately, run up to this mercenary, and attack him with the Silver Lance. Your goal here is to get a dual strike with Crom, and for the first time in the series, I'm going to say it. Yes, the dual strike is essential. If Crom and Frederick don't kill this guy, you have to reset. And that's it. You're front-loading all of your risk onto this one attack, instead of leaving it for a risky attack on turn 3 later on. Using this opener allows you to clear out a lot of safe territory for your other units to stand. Now let's talk about the other units. I had to completely rewrite this section of my script at the last minute, because while I was recording footage for this video, I found a way more consistent line of play, even massively improved over my opener that I showed on the recent stream. Back then, I was having a lot of trouble controlling this barbarian. The AI seems to be extremely unpredictable with this guy, even when you make the same moves, but then I realized something very, very important, and it has to do with weapon triangle advantage. You see, on his base stats, Stahl will actually always survive against this barbarian. If you look at the enemy attack, and the enemy has Luna Plus, it looks like Stahl will die, but that's not actually true. You see, when you have weapon triangle advantage, you don't just gain small bonuses, but the enemy actually loses the bonuses that they would normally get from their weapon ranks. In this case, you can see the barbarian has 14 strength, and a steel axe has 11 might. So the enemy should have 25 attack, right? But the display screen says that they have 26 attack. I was thinking with Luna Plus, Stahl would reduce this damage by 4 points, and he'd end up taking 22, which is just enough to kill him. But this is a really good indication that the game was actually balanced around Lunatic Plus play, because at base, with no other considerations, with the weapon triangle advantage from his sword removing that 1 extra point of damage, Stahl reduces it to 25, and then his defense reduces it by 4 more, which leaves him alive with just 1 HP. Kind of similar to how in the last chapter, Virion could always survive with 1 HP against the boss. Additionally, this enemy seems to really strongly prefer to attack Stahl as long as he's not paired up. So I refined my opener with this knowledge. Now I can control this barbarian. First, move Stahl over to the far edge on the left. This is key, because it's going to pull the barbarian into a space where it's much easier to deal with him next turn. I put Sully over here behind him, and don't pair up with Stahl. If you pair up, the barbarian will go after Frederick instead. We don't want that. We want him to attack Stahl. Next, have Vaike pair up with Lisa and move over to this forest. You can leave Vaike or Lisa in the lead while dropping the other character to the left. And last, pair up Virion with Robin so they get some extra defense, and move them over to this square to body block for Vaike. Or Lisa, whoever you used in the lead. The barbarian won't be able to reach them with Robin in the way. Sometimes, if your Robin has low defense, maybe they'll attack Robin instead, but either way, this pulls them away from Frederick, which is very important. With this setup, it becomes extremely consistent for Frederick to survive this enemy phase. As long as the axe fighter doesn't damage him first, these spear fighters have very little chance of killing him. They would need to both get Luna Plus and both land their attacks. Frederick is pretty much always safe unless you get Nightmare RNG. Additionally, if you got the strength benchmarks I mentioned in the last chapter, a Frederick and Crom dual strike will 1 round eliminate these soldiers. Now, these dual strikes are not mandatory, however, if and when they land, they create a massive shift in momentum, specifically in your favor. It drastically reduces the pressure on Frederick on the following turn, while giving the rest of your units so much free territory and zone control. You have a huge section of the map to move around and stand wherever you want. You can basically pick off this wounded fighter however you prefer, give the experience to whoever you prefer, and it's great when that happens. On the following turn, it's usually possible to set up a kill on this axe fighter while leaving Vaike, Sully, or Robin in range of just one of the soldiers. Then you can draw that soldier away from Frederick on turn 2. As for Frederick, if Frederick can move onto the fort or a position up north, use a healing item, and guarantee his own survival on the next enemy phase, it can often be a good idea to have him use this, and don't be afraid to use the elixir. Now we're going to discuss a technique which I think I developed myself and can be applied to many different maps. I don't ever see anyone else doing this, but maybe it's possible other people came up with it on their own too, and we had the same idea separately. Either way, I'm going to explain it in detail, because I don't think it's very well known or very well utilized right now. At the very least, I'm applying it in very weird, different, but surprisingly effective ways. Okay, so originally I got this idea for dealing with counter, where I would have Frederick set up on a tile, preferably a fort with no weapons equipped, so that he can't deal counter damage to himself. The key is picking a location that's far enough away from the rest of your army to give them space. You see, if enemies think that they can attack Frederick, they will always move toward him, even if they have no valid spots to stand. Now, why is this important? Well, basically, you can leave Frederick in range of about 8 enemies or more, and as long as they all see him as a valid target, they will all surround him and stay in these positions forever, even if they can't really attack him, and Fred only needs to survive 4 hits per turn. Now, while these enemies are surrounding Frederick, your other units can easily draw them out one at a time and eliminate them safely. It's a little bit slower than fast, aggressive gameplay, of course, but trust me, this is not as slow as some turtling strategies. It's actually faster than you might imagine. More importantly, what I realized after a few runs is that you have many battles in the game where this tactic can be used, even if the enemies don't have counter. Like in this map, for example, you can have Frederick hold all of the enemy aggression safely and then pull the enemies away one at a time and feed all of the kills to Miriel, or feed all of the kills to Vaike, or whichever unit you prefer. What this accomplishes is that it allows you to safely train basically any unit that you want to, even while playing on Lunatic Plus. Even trying to train a frail unit like Miriel from level 1 works with this strategy. It's kind of crazy how well this works, and how I've never seen anyone else discuss it. So if you want to train one of these units, this is a great time to do it. Right now I'm showing some footage that I've been recording for my Miriel Emblem video, and as you can see, she was able to get almost every kill on the bottom section of the map. If you get into a situation where you can't use this strategy, or you simply don't want to use this strategy, typically what I do instead is move my units into the bottom left, and utilize this mountain to split up the enemy forces. You can have Frederick stand right on this corner space to block enemies, and funnel them more slowly toward the rest of your units. While backing up, you can move around the mountain to gain more free space. This strategy is a little tougher to pull off. It requires a very high level awareness and positioning every turn, good understanding of terrain, and if you ever make a mistake, if you let the enemies get onto the mountain tiles, if you let your back line get overwhelmed, it can lead to a reset after spending 10 or 15 minutes trying to hold the line here. However, I do recommend playing out these attempts, even if you do get forced into the corner strategy, because honestly, this is a very difficult but fair encounter, and practicing your positioning and tactics against these enemies will help you improve your skills on each attempt. Moving forward, whether you win or lose, you'll find yourself getting slightly better at the game, learning from your mistakes, and ultimately this experience will help you more in your future attempts and future chapters than just giving up. These general strategies produce measurable results. It used to take me 3 hours or longer to clear this chapter. Now I can always clear it in less than an hour. One tech I'd like to show off here takes advantage of the value you gain by having 2 range and 1 range characters paired up together. So for example here, I pair up Miriel and Robin. Miriel takes the fire tome, she attacks with it, she fishes for dual strikes with Robin. If she doesn't get one, you have another unit move next to her. That unit grabs Robin, puts Robin in the lead, Robin takes the fire tome back, and then finishes off the enemy, or attacks at point blank range. You can do this combination with Varian and Sully, you can do it with Varian and Frederick, Crom and Robin, basically any 2 characters with range and melee overlap. You have the range unit attack first, then you pull the melee unit forward and attack at point blank range. You could even have Varian pull Crom into melee range, Crom can melee attack, then another unit can grab Varian back into 2 range and shoot from there. Keep this in mind for later, because it can be used against the boss too. Okay, once the bottom section is clear, we have the top section to approach and deal with. This map uses a structure which is used in more than a few Awakening maps, and it tends to be my favorite type of map to tackle because, in my opinion, it tests all of the player's skills, at least the skills I consider important. So basically, the first section of the map is trying to establish zone control while dealing with waves of aggressive enemies, and it forces you to be very economical with your player phase and enemy phase actions while testing your ability to form defensive formations and constantly be aware of the best positioning tactics in a situation where you have to adapt to danger every turn. And that's really cool. Usually this takes around 3 or 4 turns to stabilize. Then you get a chance to rest, reset, and then approach the second half of the map. And this is where things get really fun. All of the enemies on the top section have linked AI. This means you actually have a lot of options for how to start the engagement. Once the fighting starts, you'll have the same problem of being attacked by a wave of aggressive enemies. But there's one key difference. This type of encounter tests your ability to scout the enemies, come up with a preemptive plan of engagement based on their skills, positions, and stats, and then start the battle on your own terms, which is also really, really cool. I specifically love the last boss group in Chapter 5 for this reason, but this group of enemies in Chapter 2 is good as well, and there's a few cool tricks that are specific to this map. For example, you can use one of your water walking units to fight the enemies on the left side across the river. This lowers the number of enemies who are attacking Frederick and can make the final rush slightly more consistent. Although it can also be tricky if your group ends up getting split up with the boss in between them, so I don't always use this strategy, especially if Frederick seems like he'll be completely safe anyway. However, if this spear fighter on the left has Luna Plus or Hawkeye, it can be a good idea to draw him out with Robin so that Frederick doesn't have to deal with him later. I think the boss of this chapter is a bit overtuned, but he's not impossible to deal with. If you are going to quick reset at all on this map, I recommend quick resetting for the boss. His most deadly skills are Vantage, Hawkeye, and that's basically it. Even Luna Plus isn't too scary if he doesn't have Hawkeye or Vantage. I don't normally do this, but I could see it being a good idea to reset until you see this boss has Pass for one of his 2 skills. That way it's impossible for him to have the combination of Vantage and another deadly skill. So the main tech for this map is learning how the linked AI works and the best way to start the battle on your own terms. These 2 guys guarding the bridge won't move or attack unless they both see that they can attack the same target. Once that happens, the battle begins, and everything starts moving so fast, you can get get quickly overwhelmed and feel like you blinked and got a game over. One solution that I found, by setting up properly on this bridge, you can use an anchoring strategy. In fact, this map is how I discovered the anchoring strategy. Put Frederick within range of 2 enemies. I prefer the position on the left with the silver lance equipped, and a Vaike pair-up for extra strength will allow him to one-shot the incoming mercenaries, and the extra defense will make the fighter less likely to target him. Now, here's the trick. Even though we put Fred in range of 2 enemies, which will trigger their linked AI, this doesn't mean that we can't use our other units, and it doesn't mean that both enemies will attack Fred. So in this square here to the bottom right, only the barbarian can reach this tile. What I like to do is put Crom here with a pair-up partner. You can use Robin or someone else. You could also put Robin in the lead with a sword equipped, or use Stahl with his sword equipped. You have options. Using Stahl can work decently well, because Stahl's high movement allows him to reposition as far as needed on the following turn. However, I tend to rely on a good movement tech here by placing 2 units 5 spaces away from Crom in the plus-shaped formation we talked about before. On the following turn, Crom can move back 5 spaces and then transfer his partner and then pair up with the other unit. This allows you to get Crom out safely if he's been wounded. Once the fight starts, I like to have Frederick back up and start guarding one of these forts while the rest of your units draw out the enemies one at a time. By moving to the fort on the right, he can one-shot the second incoming merc with the silver lance equipped, so make sure to go over here on the right. After that, he can either keep the bronze sword equipped if you want him to get experience, or unequip all of his weapons if you want to feed the kills to other units. It's the same strategy we used for the bottom half of the map. You can unequip Frederick and then pull the enemies away from him one at a time, just like we did in that bottom section. However, the boss makes it a lot tougher because, well, this boss is pretty scary. In my opinion, he is the scariest boss to appear in the game so far, and there will not be another enemy this dangerous for a while. Almost every pair-up combination that you can think of will feel like they either have not quite enough speed to avoid being doubled, or if they can get enough speed, the boss can just one-shot them. And it's very tricky to draw him away safely, but because his range is so wide, he can also block you from drawing away the melee attackers. While I slowly draw away all of these enemies and run around the map, let's talk about the Chapter 2 units. You can easily feed kills to whoever you want, using the methods I outlined. So which characters are worth using? I think all of them can be used if you want to, but that's different from saying all of them can be used at once. They can't. You really should pick one and focus on them. Or you can even skip all of these guys and use units that join later, already trained for you. Lunatic Plus is very strict on your macro strategy. If you try to train too many units, you're going to struggle in the long run. I usually find it's best to focus on a core of Frederick, Lisa, Robin, Crom, and Sumia, and then pick other units to fill in the support, secondary combat, and other roles over time, depending on the needs of your army and your overall composition. Honestly, even Sumia isn't mandatory, depending on what you're doing. I encourage people to come up with their own team builds because I think my videos are really only the first step in solving this game mode, and I know there are smarter and better players than me who can come up with even more consistent strategies. Even my own strategies are being refined while I'm working on these scripts. I specifically like Sumia because she's very economical in my opinion, and we're going to talk about that later. But if you've been watching the streams, you already know where I'm going with Sumia. If you want to use Vaike, Sully, Stahl, or Miriel, you need to pick probably just one of them and start training that character right now. If they fall behind at all, it will be tough for them to catch up. Additionally, you don't really have enough experience to go around to train up all of these characters. You can't use Vaike, Sully, and Miriel and get all 3 of them to level 10 in time for an early promotion, so it's often a choice of which one do you want to use and how you're going to fill that role otherwise. Let's start by talking about Vaike. He's apparently really popular. People really seem to like this guy, and I see the reasons why. I think he can be a great unit if you feed him properly. However, the currently accepted strategy I think views him in a light that is very different from how I play the game. One of the reasons Vaike is popular is because he's being compared to Robin as a solo carry for the entire run, and even then, it's a Lunatic mode comparison, which doesn't hold up very well on Lunatic Plus. Either way, I'm gonna go over it. The typically accepted strategy for Awakening is that you need a single carry in this game. It's either A or B. You have to use Robin as a carry, or you have to use Vaike as a carry. Now, you've probably noticed from this video series, I'm specifically going out of my way to outline strategies where people can build entire teams and play the game the way that a normal Fire Emblem game would be played. Realistically, I think both of these units are worth using, and you can use them both in a single playthrough very easily and very effectively. I don't think low man strategy is the most fun way to play the game, and I'm not even entirely convinced that it's the best way, but that's an argument for a different video. For now, let's stick to the Vaike discussion. People like him because on Lunatic, he can be turned into a very reliable low-man carry, and he can even be adapted very well to general team-based strategies, and I like him for that second reason, specifically as one of my primary combat units, not a one-man force that clears the whole game by himself. One of my problems with Vaike, and the reason why I don't use him in every run, is because you get Gregor for free later on, and with my playstyle, I really like units that you get for free and don't have to train. Vaike specifically is fairly annoying to train because his default hit rate is not very good, and he can't attack at 2 range immediately, and when you do get a hand axe, you have very limited charges, unlike the Fire Tome, which is cheap and replaceable. It means you have to often move into a dangerous position to try and get kills with Vaike. Taking risky shots with him 10 or 15 minutes into a map does not feel satisfying, and furthermore, to improve his accuracy, people recommend forging, but if you're forging a weapon for Vaike, that's money you're not spending on a forged Thunder Tome, a forged Iron Bow, a forged Killing Edge. The list goes on and on. Your amount of resources are finite here, and unless you're doing a grinding run, in that context, every unit is viable. So yeah, I don't love that argument. Now, I do think Awakening probably does one of the best jobs of balancing the value of project units versus free units compared to any other game in franchise history. Vaike, while you're training him, will actually be quite useful to your army, and he will contribute in every chapter. So it's not like you're dragging along and trying to feed a deadweight unit. It's not that at all. Additionally, if you train him, he will almost unquestionably end up a stronger unit than Gregor. For some reason, they have almost the exact same growths, except Vaike has a much higher strength growth and slightly higher growths in a few other stats as well. Yeah, Gregor does not have any personal growths that are higher than Vaike. Vaike is the same or better in every category. Because of the difference in their base stats, Gregor will be faster and more accurate, but it's a minor difference, and as they gain more levels, Vaike will become better and better over time, and he has more time to build up support ranks with his partner before Gregor joins. Additionally, Awakening also does a great job at making weapon ranks matter, and when you get to Chapter 9, Vaike will have a much better axe rank and already have access to buyable infinite hand axes, which matters a lot. Here's the counter argument. While Vaike is better than Gregor, Gregor is good enough. So why do you need a unit that is better than a unit who is already good enough? Ultimately, I do think if you like Vaike, or if you have a reason why you want to use Vaike for a particular run as part of a team building strategy, with serious consideration into why you're using him in your hero slot, and not using Gregor, he is worth the effort that it takes to train him up. If you are looking for one unit to carry you through the game, he will also perform better than Gregor in that role, although personally, I'm not interested in that role. I don't think in a serious team building context, you have to choose between Vaike and Robin. I recommend using both. The veteran skill makes it so that Robin can keep up in levels even if they see minimal combat, while you can have Vaike fighting a lot more and gaining the experience he needs to start growing early on as well. Then you end up with 2 combat-capable frontliners instead of only 1. Why would you restrict yourself to only using 1? I do not like that argument at all. Having 2 combat units will allow you to hold multiple choke points, secure multiple objectives, build wider defensive walls, and the list goes on. Plus, because you get Frederick for free, now you have 3 characters who are capable of holding defensive choke points. They can cover multiple angles at the same time, or they can be rotated out and healed in sequence. Just keep in mind that if you have something else you want to do, like say for example, if I want to use Miriel, I probably can't afford to give any experience to Vaike. So in that situation, it's better to bench Vaike, feed Miriel everything right now, and later on, I'll get Gregor for free anyway. This is why I love the free units so much. They allow you to build more diverse teams and try different builds on each playthrough. I mentioned the balance between project units and free units was top tier in this game, and I only talked about Vaike before, but this is one of the other big reasons why. The existence of Gregor allows you to pick and train units other than Vaike if you want to. However, because Vaike is so good, you can use him if you want to as well. So instead of being forced into a stale meta where you always use the same units, Awakening gives you a lot of choice for who to use, even on the highest difficulty. And because all of the units in this game have a very unique identity, it adds to a lot of variety in gameplay. With all that being said, even at his absolute worst, Vaike is an extremely valuable pair-up stat line that you can get access to in the first few chapters. You can use him like we did here to boost Fred's attack and defense, and, like with Sully, even if he never sees any direct combat or gains any experience, he still provides a valuable service to the army before eventually getting phased out. Now that is a great place to be as a unit, if that's your worst possible assessment. Now, I talked way more about Vaike than I was originally planning, so let's try to keep the others brief. Stahl has many of the same strengths as Sully. He's a great utility and support unit. However, I think that Sully does everything that Stahl can do, plus she does more. He doesn't have potential S-rank support with anyone that you want in any of the early chapters, unless you're using a female Robin and want to support with Stahl very specifically. On the other hand, like we discussed with Sully in the last video, she works as a good option for almost every single male character in the early game. All of her pair-up fighting will build toward valuable C support bonuses very early on that will help make Paralog 1 and Chapter 5 more consistent, and she can pick any unit she wants from this early game group to become a solid S-rank permanent supporter over time if you want to keep her in your army. And yeah, I guess Stahl does have Sully, but the same argument goes both ways. Sully has Stahl, so they kind of cancel each other out. And even then, you don't really want to use both of them. Not to mention, you'd much rather have Sully supporting Frederick rather than supporting Stahl if you were even going to go with that sort of build. People often mention to me about how Stahl's combat is better than Sully, and I don't know, maybe this is a thing on Lunatic mode, but guys, the difference here is absolutely marginal, and both of them just suck at combat. It honestly will almost never matter ever if you're playing Lunatic Plus. Stahl surviving on 3 HP and Sully surviving on 1 HP, and neither one of them killing the enemy is, practically speaking, the same result. To make matters worse, I'm not even convinced that his combat is better. It takes him longer to gain javelin access, he has worse matchups against a wider range of enemy types, and his low speed gives him a bad matchup against so many enemies. He might have more bulk, but that stops mattering as soon as enemies double and kill him. Miriel, I'm currently working on an entire video about her, so I'll keep this one really brief like I should have done for Vaike. She is extremely fast and deadly. She is worth training if you want a unit for player phase removal, and she doesn't really have any competition. You don't get a Gregor type unit to replace her later. If you don't train her, you pretty much lose out on your direct promotion to Sage. And most importantly, if you do invest into Miriel, you get an additional staff user, who is also a trained and effective combat unit, which is very, very good. Stabs are fantastic in this game mode. I guess if you were going to compare her to anyone, it would be Lisa, but Lisa is weird because she exclusively trains using stabs and she doesn't leech experience from anyone else. Anyway, with stabs, you're just going to have to keep trusting me on this one, but I promise you I am going to show you the power of staff users in the upcoming videos, and it's going to blow the meta of this game wide open. Finally, if at all possible, try to set up a situation where you can have the boss move into a tile and be surrounded by all of your other units. We did this in the previous chapter, but essentially, if you lure the boss to the northern fort, move all of your units up to the southern fort, and then draw him back to the southern fort, he'll move into a range where all of your units can swarm him. Just like the last chapter, you need to set up a kill here. Make sure you use all of your player phase actions to get rid of this guy before he has a chance to move again and kill Lisa. Now, you don't have to do everything one specific way, or do everything perfectly here. You might have to rely on some risky attacks if your strategy isn't perfect, but if you want a line of play that is about as consistent as possible, try this. Because, again, for the third time while working on this video, I had to rewrite my script and even re-record some audio, because I found a really consistent strategy while I was recording footage. Start by moving your units onto the bridge. With this strategy, you can always choose which unit fights the Myrmidon and which unit fights the Barbarian, and you don't have to worry about enemy targeting AI, because once you trigger the linked movement, these two units will move to the edge of their range and attack Frederick on the left, and in this case, I used Stahl on the right. Now, Robin in this position here can shoot at the soldier across the river. While you're standing in this tile, no enemies can target Robin, but it will trigger all of the enemies to become aggressive, and they'll all immediately begin moving toward Frederick, because he's the only valid target. Here, we're going to use the 1-2 range weapon of the boss against him, because if you stay in this spot and make sure you're on full health, if Robin has a C support with Lisa and a unit paired up with them, the boss will see Robin as a valid target to attack, and instead of going after Frederick, they will move over to the river all by themselves. This splits up the boss from all of the other enemies. Now, Robin can spend several turns fighting the boss. With the support bonus, you'll have no crit chance, and this allows Frederick and the other group to fight the melee attacking units using the fort strategy. If Robin can't survive against the boss, you might need Fred to fight them using the old strategy, by using the fort to weather his attacks. In that case, use the method we discussed before, draw out the other enemies one at a time, although it can be a little tricky with the boss range overlapping, and once the boss is the only enemy left alive, surround him and kill him. Make sure when fighting the boss that you transfer around your 1-2 range characters in order to get some extra attacks. You can also intentionally have Robin leave the boss alive on low health, and then draw him out later in order to give the experience to whoever you prefer. For example, have Frederick and Robin pair up, make sure Frederick has the bronze sword equipped. Robin shoots the boss, transfer Frederick over to melee range with someone else, you can use Crom for this, but keep Fred in the rear position for now if possible. Now Crom will attack the boss next. You're hoping to get a Frederick dual strike on either of these attacks. At this point, if a Frederick dual strike hasn't taken out the boss yet, it's okay. You've still got plenty of room to recover. You can always rely on Frederick to kill the boss. You can have Lisa grab Frederick first, then have someone like Sully bring Frederick into a lead position, leapfrogging him over to the boss where he can attack directly. If all else fails, if by some miracle the boss has survived all of these attacks from Robin, Crom, Frederick, potential dual strikes, you still have characters like Miriel, Virion, Stahl, and possibly even Vaike to secure the kill. If the boss doesn't have Vantage, you only need guaranteed accuracy to defeat him, even if his counterattack would technically kill you. But if he does have Vantage, you have to play around that. However, having Vantage means that he can't have both Hawkeye and Luna, so you just have to adapt your strategy based on what his offense looks like. Sometimes you can tank his Vantage attack, other times you might need to hope for a Luna plus dodge, but that's the worst case scenario. Using a pair-up partner can help you get the bonus stats you need, but realistically it shouldn't ever come down to that because the earlier attacks should have gotten rid of this guy anyway. Depending on how the exact situation plays out, you can change the exact order of your attacks, you can try to feed experience to different units, or you can recover if the boss just has like a really deadly combination of skills, but this is the basic idea for how to approach this boss. Giving the boss experience to Vaike is the hardest thing to do, because it's nearly impossible to guarantee a hit here with the Iron Axe, and if you're gambling with an 80% accurate attack at the end of a chapter that might have taken you an hour to play, it takes a lot of nerve to go for this. But the reward is that Vaike gets some delicious experience very early on, so if you are training Vaike, maybe consider gambling on that. If you want to give the experience to Frederick, it's much easier to pull this off. You only need to chip the boss down to the point where Fred can one-shot him, and honestly, it might be worth it. The same applies for Crom and Robin. The upcoming Chapter 3 is one of the most difficult chapters that really doesn't get talked about enough, but trust me, this next one is going to be brutal. Making Frederick as strong as possible, even getting one more level from this boss kill can go a long way. Although in my recent off-stream recordings, I got an incredibly underpowered Frederick, who didn't level strength, speed, or defense at all, and I still had to adapt and come up with a strategy for this map, even with a weak Frederick. I'll probably show that off in the next video, and we'll talk about that next time. So if you're looking forward to the next chapter guide, you should definitely sub to the channel. But for now, enjoy the rest of your day.